All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Friday. Thanks for taking time on Friday afternoon, and which is the third installment of the HR Huddle series by the Hampton Roads Innovation Collaborative. So wanted to first just recognize our hosts and thank them for keeping the series going. So Dan Bell, who is CEO of HRIC, and Dave Richards, who's CEO of gosh, Dave, I stumbled all over that. So, sorry. But they have been partnering with me throughout this series, and it's been a good series to help us kind of manage through the pandemic together. So the underlying theme has been the practical realities of managing through the pandemic, largely from a human resources standpoint, and talking to audiences in Hampton Roads that may have limited to no human resources presence within their organization, and connecting them with other folks in this area, and benchmarking and sharing what they've been doing as we've been managing through this particular challenge. For those that may have missed the first two series, again, we've been going with the wave of pandemic. So the first one, we really talked about that initial transition and really what it meant to set up the safety protocols and policies to ensure that operations continue to go. And, we always really look at these from a case study standpoint. So, and that one was, hey, when the first incident happened, and, and this is before we had vaccines, and we've learned a lot since then, but our first series was dealing with companies that were dealing with the unique incidences that came with the onset of the pandemic. It's interesting that we're doing this particular webinar now, because just last month was the 1-year anniversary of the WHO declaring a global pandemic. So it's great to kind of see how things have evolved. In our second series, if you haven't seen it, and these are archived on the HRIC website, we then looked at kind of what we were facing in terms of return to work. Lots of discussions about working from home and hybrid, and that seems to get a lot of the headlines. But 60% of the workforce across the U.S. Had to work in the office, or in the warehouse, or in the shop in some way or another. So we were fortunate to talk again with some local leaders in Hampton Roads about how they were managing through that. And so then fast forward, we're now seeing some progress, obviously, on vaccines, and organizations getting more comfortable with managing through the pandemic. And so this particular one is highlighting how have companies, particularly Valkyrie enterprises, remained resilient and adaptable throughout this process. And so we call it thriving in a VUCA environment. And if you're unfamiliar with that phrase, but it's an environment that has a lot of volatility, ambiguity, complexity, and I started with ambiguity first, and uncertainty. So I said VUCA, but it's VUCA. So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And if you think about it, COVID has really been VUCA on steroids. I mean,
Dan, I don't think we can hear you.
Through that, this whole time you haven't heard me?
No. Just for
you're not supposed to mute me.
Just for a few seconds. I didn't have a bell to ring, so
Okay. When did you lose me?
We only lost you for about 3 seconds.
Yeah.
3 seconds. All right. Well, Dave probably muted me when I fumbled his introduction, so I'm going to do it again. But Dave Richards has also been a great supporter of this from Concursive, so I want to thank him for his support throughout this process. So just a quick commercial on the VUCA environment. While pandemic is something we've been dealing with the last year, you can date back to the Army War College, where they were planning for a VUCA type of situation. And then you fast forward to management theorists like Tom Peters would talk about, hey, how do we get better at decision making during chaos? And so you would see companies and leaders really try to develop that skill. And, it's something that HR departments had to learn and demonstrate throughout this as well. So we're really fortunate to talk with Valkyrie Enterprises. And in the past, where we have created case studies to talk through this process, we've got a live real case study to go through. And so we're fortunate to have Kathleen Daniels, who is the Chief Administration Officer with Valkyrie, and that includes, among other responsibilities, human resources, and Nicole Kamen, who is the Vice President of Finance. And we've been able to connect over the last year and hear a lot about just the things that they're maneuvering through and how they've pivoted. There's the first one throughout this whole process. And it's just a great example of not only dealing with the challenges that the pandemic presented, but there are a lot of opportunities that came up throughout this. Enhancements in technology, enhancements in culture, enhancements in operations. And they've really got examples across the board that I think will be great lessons learned for those that are on the call. So really excited to talk with them. So without further ado, I gave a quick introduction, but Kathleen and Nicole, how about give us a quick commercial on who Valkyrie Enterprises is, defense contractor here in Hampton Roads, but share a little bit about who you are, and then we'll dig into your story.
Sure. Thanks, Dan. I'm Kathleen Daniels, and I'll get started if you don't mind, Nicole. Just a brief overview of Valkyrie Enterprises, defense contractor. We are, most of our work is targeted in engineering services. We are about a little over 700 employees now. We do have sort of a kind of a gray collar and white collar work group. The gray collar does a lot of ship install work, which is lucrative and keeps us busy. And we'll kind of touch on that, I think, a little bit later and how we handled that group. But we also have a small products line, maritime products as well, out of our Northern Virginia office. We are worldwide. We have this is Virginia Beach is obviously our headquarters here and has been since day one. We have offices in California and down in South Carolina now, and just most recently in Ramstein, Germany. So we're those are where our offices are, and of course our people are worldwide as well. Not necessarily always at the office.
And we're going to learn about this throughout the call because it's an organization, a great testament to, again, kind of facing challenges and constraints head on and how they grew and evolved throughout that process. So, I mentioned the 1-year anniversary of declaring a global pandemic. So let's go back to the first quarter of last year. I think what, the first demonstration of rolling with this is how you approached what the office environment was going to look like. And, you had a pilot project there in terms of where people worked and how they worked. How about share those initial days and kind of how Valkyrie worked through it?
Sure. So like many companies, I'm sure in those early days in March, we had a lot of leadership discussions about, hey, what is this going to look like? Will we be off for the next week? I think we were looking in terms of just a few days. And I think we had got our corporate leadership team together and a couple of our operational leads, including our CEO and our COO. And we had a staff meeting and really tried to work through some of what we thought at the time were worst case scenarios. And what we came up with was, should we have to shut down, what would it look like to the back of the house functions, whether it's finance and billing, HR, IT, could we still manage the business at hand if we couldn't come into the office? And we talked through that a lot. And what we decided on is let's take the next week and start to have, some part of the workforce working from home, some part staying in the office, and then we'll select one day, I think it was a Wednesday, where everybody will try to work remotely. We'll do some facility cleaning and we'll give this a go for a week to see how we manage, work out the kinks of technology, because this would have been a first time for a lot of us, particularly in Nicole's world where it's very paper centric. And so I think we all agreed, some reluctantly, but we were like, okay, we'll give it a try. And I don't think we finished that first week before we went to a complete, hey, we're not going to come back in right now. Everyone is going to continue to work from home. And then it was, kind of a scramble to focus on the plans that we thought we just had on paper, particularly our IT team, which was phenomenally responsive to all of our needs. And we also realized that we had to quickly establish sort of a protocol if anyone had to go back into the office to get the paper, or maybe to do some printing or to download information. And so what started as a let's just work this through and test it as if we were not going to come back to the office turned into the reality for basically a year plus.
Well, and I think as you kind of went from pilot to permanent, as things evolved, I think one of the things that stood out as I've gotten to know you and the company is you also then identified and moved into a new office during that time frame. So there was some transition. So be interesting to hear about just kind of the reaction and the logistics from the workforce there. But then, maybe more importantly, as the folks on this call, and I think companies in general, we're still talking about remote work and hybrid work and what's the right fit. And so, be curious to hear about your philosophy, particularly as you saw how you found the impact on productivity as you had to go remote and perhaps then evolve to hybrid, how you maintain that and how you maintained equity, between managing people that were remote and those that, in that gray collar workforce that had to be quote unquote on campus, how you managed, that environment too.
Sure. Well, there's a couple of things there. So Dan, if I don't connect on any of those points, definitely.
I warned you, I love the multi-point question. So.
I don't want to, be the only person talking, so definitely interrupt, but I'll kind of kick it off. So we went remote, and as a defense contractor, I will say that our customers, the military, was very much on the forefront as well as far as protocols and closing down offices. So it truly affected us in our overall footprint. That in the end, I think really turned out to be a good thing, meaning we weren't faced with the challenges of, hey, we want to do this as a company, but our customers, need us to do, A, B, C, and D, something that's different than what we wanted to handle, except for, as you mentioned, thank you, that gray collar workforce. And that specifically was, it was a challenge. And again, we had lots of meetings and discussions on it. I think I'd like to mention that, at the beginning, and Nicole and I will certainly, pull this thread as well throughout, but we were really, really fortunate to have a CEO that was engaged, open-minded, and transparent in his approach and his communications to everyone in the company. We have company-wide email lists, and we were routinely updating, from him. He was routinely updating the entire company about concerns, about here's our approach, this is what we're going to do, and even was willing to come back, and if we had said, hey, we're going to start to go down this road, but we learned that maybe this isn't the right thing, we course correct. I won't say pivot. So we were very, very lucky to have that leadership for us. So particularly for that. So now we have this group of employees where I would say probably 3/4 of us are able to work in a work from home environment, and this other quarter can't. I mean, when you're pulling cable on a ship in a shipyard, it's tough to do that remotely. So we had to communicate to them, about our eagerness to keep them safe, providing, PPE that's required, and being aggressive about investigating all the types of programs that could help us support that approach from a company level. And that's where, Nicole, came in and just really, helped drive that train for the company with regard to the PPP loan. So, we took that approach, applied, was successful, and decided that for our folks that were in situations that maybe looked like an inequitable, environment, we created a hazard pay for them based on, the time that they're in those situations where they can't social distance and be safe because they're out there. But along this transparency line, we also knew that this was a temporary situation, temporary because of the funding and the approach. But so we talked about that early on and often, and we engaged and empowered our managers to do the same. So I think we were successful there. And Nicole, I don't know if you have anything else you want to mention kind of on that, that loan and investigating those items.
Well, I'll take a step back first on productivity. I think we definitely experienced increased productivity. Employees were empowered due to more flexibility. They're also more happier because they get to spend more time with their kids. That's a lot of feedback that we hear. As Kathleen mentioned, one department in my under my AOR, is the billing department, and we were concerned during that first week that how are they going to do this, because it's a lot of paper. How are they going to be able to do their jobs remotely? And now today they're 100% remote, and we've experienced they're flexible and just they're thriving in a virtual environment.
They've never been happier, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I mean, they're, and that is a group, as we all know, we have to get the bills out so that we can get the revenue in, and for them to have any hiccups would have been very challenging for us as a business, but they shined. And I think they're the perfect example of them also recognizing, again, because of the transparency and the communications from leadership, that this started off with, kind of we're fortunate and we're lucky that we're able to do this. And they kind of took it on, as most of the employees did, as I don't want to lose this. So I'm going to work extra hard to make sure that I am committed to delivering whatever that product, my work product is, timely, and that I go overboard to communicate with my boss on issues. And
How much, Kathleen and Nicole, I was curious, like how much of a struggle was that for Valkyrie to accept that? So I think, it's very notable that as the billers got home and said, oh, well, I really like the kind of flexibility and the opportunity that this provides. And it seems like they also showed the accountability to, continue to their performance, if not raise their productivity. Sometimes the constraint or the reluctance may come from the business itself. So what were some of the signs that you looked for that said, what, we can make this comfortable? Because quite frankly, a lot of companies, when they went to remote, they amped up the micromanagement.
Sure.
And that kind of took away from any flexibility or benefit of working from home, because you were meeting or on Zoom, or you were hearing from people even more. So I'm just curious what gave you the comfort level to keep that process going?
Sure. Well, and I think, like most of us, because of the unknown and sort of this whole newness, there was a lot in the management world that probably if I can't see you sitting at your desk, how do I know you're doing your job? And I think that naturally, existed. But I think once the employees sort of showed that they can continue to deliver, there became this tangible trust among all of us, where we consciously will say this in a lot of our leadership meetings, like, hey, we're not saying the way we exist still today, and for the record, we're still max kind of remote working in the Southeastern Virginia area for our employees here. But once they see that not only are our employees working, they're happier, but they're really kind of going above and beyond. And that built, this trust that now really exists. Everybody recognizes that the team is eager to get the job done, and whatever their environment is desirable, and so they want to keep that going.
And I think employees have deadlines, and as long as they're meeting those deadlines, we don't feel the need that we have to micromanage them. Because I think micromanagement can be a little bit toxic, and you don't want to.
Right.
So one, just from a process standpoint for the audience, if there's something that, questions that you have for our guests, please put them in the chat, and I'm happy to relay them to them. So feel free to do that anytime. We'll try to allow some if we're at the end of the session, but feel free to put them in there and I'll weave them into it. So talking about remote, I want to transition a little bit in that another thing that really stood out through our conversations is, every business had to take a look at expenses during 2020 because the revenues may have not been there, and it's just such a disruption. But yet in that environment, Valkyrie Enterprises had a very strategic acquisition. And so not only, I'd like to hear about, kind of the history, the story, the confidence, to move forward with that. But then you're adding new employees in a very remote, in a remote workforce. So again, a multi-part question, but let's talk a little bit about what gave you the confidence to that. And, you shared with me candidly that when you started out with some of your virtual onboarding, it fell flat. So I want to hear about kind of how that evolved towards, a really winning experience for people that you were adding to the organization, even though they were remote.
Sure. Do you want to start with the
Yeah,
acquisition piece?
Yep.
Okay.
So an opportunity presented itself. We turned a negative situation, the negative situation being COVID, the pandemic, into a positive. The opportunity presented itself because through word of mouth, through one of our operational managers, he was talking to a friend of his who owned a company and was in a sale process, and the buyer backed out due to COVID. And we learned more about this and acquisition of this company, and it was a great strategic add-on to our company. So we took advantage of it, and we closed on that acquisition in December of 2020. You asked about what led us. I think the confidence behind it is really, as Kathleen mentioned, we have a fearless leader in our CEO, and just really trust in our leadership team and working together. And we worked through it, and it was always part of the strategic plan, but we didn't let the pandemic deter us from our goals.
Right. And so, again, our CEO, Gary Lasota, has always been open with the leadership team and the managers about that. Always is his goal, which is why I think, probably the ops manager said, oh, this might be a good fit. And we did this all remotely. We started to use we use the technologies of DocuSign to get documents signed and it shipped around. Whereas before, in the old days, you'd kind of get everybody together and we're signing in papers and you're going back and forth. But so we did that all virtually as well. And literally identified the target, did due diligence, and closed within a few months. And that was because we were willing, I guess, to kind of rewrite the rules for ourselves. And again, have that vision offered up by our CEO. So that COVID has not deterred that piece of our business. Let's just say that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So again, I mean, there certainly was, we've all had to react in some way, but part of it was Valkyrie adhering to what your strategic plan was. And there's okay, let's revisit our goals. If we think we can stay committed to them, then you could go through that. I think what is useful for the audience and any other, organization is, we're not about to go back to the old normal anytime soon. So if your growth strategy has acquisition or others, it's likely going to be in a new way. And so you mentioned that you kind of developed some new habits or behaviors, and perhaps it was even more efficient as a result of being forced to go through it. So you teased this a little bit, but how for future acquisitions or just maybe future opportunities, what are you going to use from this experience going forward that you think is going to make it both effective and efficient?
Well, we used it a little bit before, but we use share data rooms, SharePoint sites. We set that up early and often, and upload and share documents that way. We won't wait for a team to travel in town to sit down to have discussions. Obviously, meeting in person adds a nice another dimension to things, but those won't hold us up moving forward. We talked about using technology as a defense contractor, where we usually abide obviously by our government customers. There's a lot of no cameras on computers, et cetera, et cetera. So we started during COVID, and obviously, during these kind of transitions, we started buying cameras to sit outside the computer. We have one on our desk right here. So again, we kind of gave ourselves permission to sort of rewrite the rules, and it was a little freeing and kind of exciting. I mean, I think in COVID, what's taught us is that when you don't really have a defined future, what's next? And I know we all had many of those days, weeks, months, and obviously a year where we just really weren't sure what was going to happen or how long it was going to be. So I think when you don't have that, limiting your what if stories, it allows you to really kind of open up and do things in a different way. And we were fortunate to see our customers do that as well, the Department of Navy and DoD. So we're lucky on those lines. But I know you also asked about onboarding and because we were still hiring this whole time. I think in 2020, we hired probably about 214 employees.
Nice.
And so we onboarded them, and we started off doing it virtually, really just through Teams. We use Outlook, and it kind of fell flat. There was a lot of people probably weren't connected. The presentations were very one-dimensional, not in the information, but just the delivery. And it's a long day. It's 8 hours. It's tough to sit in front of a screen where you don't see anybody and you're just listening. And so this whole camera piece added a large element to it. We started videotaping presentations as well to kind of mix it up. That was also very helpful if a presenter was off, because where before, if somebody was off, somebody else sort of stepped in and gave more of an abridged version. It kind of lost its flavor there. So we've really brought in the video element and really kind of drove a little bit more interaction, I think, even via electronically. So we're still onboarding today virtually. So we'll see when we get back to the real world here.
Well, and I think one lesson learned throughout this process, and if you're doing buzzword bingo, yes, I use lesson learned. The Neuro Leadership Institute did some research, because oftentimes companies want to cram all the onboarding, into 1, 2, 3 day experience and then move on. I said, they're going to retain more and be engaged more if you're chunking it, so do 15 minutes at a time and spread that over a time frame. As we're talking about onboarding, I got a question from Megan Oswald, just what you saw in terms of comfort level and absorption of the information, whether it's, the technical or functional information, but even the cultural information. Did what did the differences look like between those that got to do it the quote unquote old way, and then the employees that went through the onboarding? Are you seeing any differences there, or how were you able to make that a consistent process?
Sure. I think there are naturally some differences. A lot of it is, the face to the name, and we help that out with the video, but the in-person, conversation, I think naturally happens a little bit better when you are there in person. And so what we've done is we've really kind of forced ourselves to do the follow-ups with the new hire employees and the managers. Did your employee get all the information they need to fill out their timesheet? So we're forcing, even though still all via electronics, but we're forcing those conversations a little bit more and connecting back with the employee and their manager to make sure that they are settling in. And again, that manager there are many managers who have yet to see all of the employees that they have hired in person as well. So they're also reaching out. So I think, though you might find some fatigue in that, we really recognize that, that we need to do that and pick up the phone and talk to them. So
And if I'm not mistaken, the C-suite really got involved in that onboarding process too. And certainly want to hear what that's like, but also if perhaps there was some reluctance there, you don't have to call anybody out, but how much, where you're successful, if there was reluctance in encouraging those that may be in those senior level positions to provide more outreach to those newer employees.
Sure. We didn't, I wouldn't say that, that there was reluctance. I think a lot, as we've mentioned before too, our CEO is very transparent and very open-minded. So it's very comfortable for Nicole and I in our positions to bring up an opposing idea or to say, respectfully, hey, I really think we need to look at it this way. And so we feel very comfortable. So even if we maybe felt that if someone wasn't 1,000% on board, we have such a great sort of comfort level, in this management group with the leadership and the C-suite that we can say, hey, can we do this? And their response, even if it's they might not be 100% on board, they're always willing to try. And so it's sort of like, okay, well, we'll give it a try. We'll do this, and then the results are what they are, and hopefully mostly positive.
Well, you mentioned that I think sometimes it can be things easy to put in PowerPoint, but maybe not demonstrated in reality. Is this ideal to trial and error or fail forward? Is there an example where, hey, we tried it, it didn't work, and here's what we did next, and we learned from that, and it became a benefit to the organization?
Well, I'll tell you, we don't really know of anything that sounds a little pompous from you to say. I don't know of anything we didn't try that didn't work, but I'm sure there's in there. But I think maybe something that we did that was short-lived that we had some emotional discussions was this hazard pay that we set up. With our employees that were in those environments that were a little bit more dangerous given the pandemic challenges. And that, so we had some hard conversations. There were some direct emails to our CEO that said basically, hey, you paid me for, and I think it was 10 months we did it. I think it was about 10 months of hazard pay. And now you're saying you're not going to pay me, and I'm still, in the shipyard working. And Gary will answer those directly. He's also very good. He'll sort of share with the group to say, hey, here's a question that's come up from an employee. I'm going to go back. What are your thoughts? And so he kind of lets us all give our feedback. But I think sitting down with employees as humans and talking to them as you would, a friend or a person that you truly care about, to say, hey, I get it. This is not ideal. And I wish that the business was able to do this. We did it for 10 months. And we were open and honest, the whole way to say this is, going to end, because this is what is funding this, our ability to do so. But we will continue to investigate and try to find other ways to help out. So for example, we obviously we had this hazard pay, but we also set up a special charge that ended up allowing employees that were stuck in the 2-week quarantine based on contacts, et cetera, to not use their vacation and charge basically overhead to us. So the business was taking that as well, so not to burden and to make sure that employees knew that we were there for them, because they know that we're counting on them to get up and go to work. That too has ended, and we really kind of managed that a little bit along the lines of, particularly now where we're a little bit smarter, in early 2021 than we were in August of 2020 as far as understanding and things along those lines. And but that was another conversation, and and we weren't really, it wasn't smoke and mirrors or trying to, sell them anything. It was sort of honest communication. And I think, although they might not agree with it and be happy, I think it's appreciated. So.
Well, I think that, go ahead. Sorry, Nicole, go ahead.
I'll be real quick. Another kind of in the weeds example in the back office. I think virtual doesn't work for everybody. We had some new employees and some employees transitioning into new roles and just were really struggling in the virtual environment. So we had to adapt, and we came up with a more hybrid, recognizing safety and not and maintaining distance. We brought some people back into the office, and they were able to produce and be more productive back in the office. So it wasn't a one way for everybody.
I think that's I think that's the key to a lot of what we're doing is it wasn't it wasn't we are all working remotely. I mean, I think our language, we always said we're encouraging max telework, because we do have a couple of warehouses and there were some, but when people are coming in outside of the shipyard environment, which we couldn't really control, we set office protocols. If you're going to be in the office, you will be wearing a mask. If you must have a meeting in person, we're fortunate, we have a couple of very large conference rooms, 6 feet distance. You will wipe off the copy machine with the Clorox wipes that we have here. Everybody was given hand sanitizer. So what was nice is we gave managers and employees the ability to make those decisions that to best fit what the work that they have to do or their learning environment. And so that's really worked well too. So we have
just seeing some positive reaction to that in the comments in terms of adapting to the needs of employees, because companies all were under the gun, but I think those that were more employee centric in their reaction, then they're the ones that had an opportunity to thrive throughout that, and was a key takeaway in your example, and I think in other organizations. You mentioned that as you adopted to the needs of the employee, you brought some back into the workforce. What would you say kind of percentage wise now are those that are in office or in warehouse and are still remote? And then I have a follow-up question after that, but kind of what's the balance look like there?
I'll say outside of our shipyard workers, I would say maybe 10%, very, very little. It seems to be really kind of as needed. Nicole and I might come in for a leadership meeting that's at noon. And then go back home, or take advantage of, I'm here, it's quiet, I've got to get some stuff done, and no one else is here. So it's, I'm not really near anybody anyway, if I was at home or in my office, just because it's not, obviously not a full space, but I think, that ability to really kind of manage when I need to be in there, or I know myself and I have to sit down at my desk in my office to really be productive, and allowing people to assess themselves that way and being okay with that.
Curious, I mean, you talked about bringing on over 200 people last year. And as you start to think about, continuing to hire, the hybrid workforce has really expanded the region where job seekers are looking, as opposed to really regional. They might say, oh, I could work remote and work for a company headquartered somewhere else. And so that's increasing an already competitive talent marketplace. So curious what you're experiencing there. Is there a challenge to find talent? Is it more difficult to bring that talent in? And what have you had to do to adapt to that if necessary?
Sure. I think finding talent is always challenging, and in our line of work, it varies because based on the skill set, particularly as a defense contractor, there's a lot of unique, skills and experience that only is received in, certain military environments. And so, that group is very defined versus, maybe it's a little bit easier to bring on like the techs as far as skill set, But that also seems to be a demographic and group that you're battling a great need, because those shipyards and that environment kept moving on, and companies were willing maybe to pay a little bit more. You're in kind of a challenge to find those folks as well. Not showstopper, but it just really forces you to look at things a little differently. So sourcing, we did a lot of online events, online chat rooms. We actually have our very first drive-through job fair up in Hampton next week. So we're very excited about that. First time we've done it. And I know that there are some other businesses in the area that have tried that. So we're excited to find some success there and doing something a little bit different. But also, to your point, there are candidates that are coming in and asking, is there an opportunity for me to work remotely? And some positions, absolutely. I mean, you can work remotely and be in Iowa. Others are, you need to be here, but there's flexibility to potentially work from home. And we always caveat that with, really meeting the needs of the customer, et cetera. So that has allowed us to open up the aperture a little bit and hopefully, become an employer of choice when you're able to show that flexibility.
I appreciate the example about the drive-through job fair, and that there's some strategic imitation there. So it's, everyone's trying to adopt, and see, I'm using adopt more than pivot because of our earlier conversation. So now I'm wearing that one out. But it's it's good that we're all kind of borrowing effectively from what we see in other organizations, which is obviously a big part of this series that we're holding here. Let me ask a fairly broad question, and you've given us some examples, but well-being of the employee has really become a strong topic over the last year. And there's a number of factors to that: mental well-being, social well-being, cultural, safety, financial. And you talked a little bit about the financial and how you developed the hazard pay with some help from the PPP. As you think about those other parts of well-being, share some examples of how you really emphasized that throughout this last year.
Sure. Well, I mean, everything from communications. I think whenever communications come out from the C-suite, more so than ever, we were always finishing up those emails with, "I hope everyone is safe and well." And that's certainly one-dimensional, but that's just one example of how we've even shifted how we communicate. We're very concerned that not only that the employees are well, but their families are well, and so that has nicely kind of been woven into this tapestry of how we communicate. We have an employee assistance program as well. Through our insurance provider. So we're using that information to really give managers tools to say, hey, don't forget that, just because you have your weekly meeting and, at the end you say, anybody have any questions, everyone doing okay? And you either get silence or just yelp that it is all golden, because it may not be. And so we really kind of encourage managers to use that, to offer it up, post it in the warehouse, the program, and where they can call or go online if anybody needs help. And just really, not in the micromanaging way, but really go the extra mile to talk to somebody on the phone and not just zip them an email. And because then you can at least maybe gauge the voice, or to recognize when you have those meetings every once in a while, to really kind of see body language, et cetera. Because it's really interesting that there are a lot of people that aren't maybe like Nicole and I, and we have our family, and so we go home, and this year we've spent a lot of time with them, and it's been, yeah, all right, that's great. But there are people, I've had conversations, people have been very candid and saying, I've had a hard time, I'm single. My social life was, I might go out to a restaurant or meet some friends over here or travel to see an old shipmate. And I have none of that. So work, really has been my social world. And when I couldn't even do that, it can be dark. And so I think just making sure that our managers feel comfortable enough, to reach out and truly see how people are doing. and not just, kind of the upcheck. And no one's reached out to me and told me they have any problems. So I guess we're good to go.
Well, and you hinted at this earlier, not even hinted, but we talked about how you adapted to employees in terms of somebody wanted to be in the office. And I know you brought it up in prior conversations. If somebody just said, look, I need to be in the office, that's going to provide some of that social network that can be reinforcing, and following guidelines, CDC guidelines, safety protocols, you were able to make it happen. And so, again, that adaptability, that can be overused, but, one of the antidotes for the VUCA environment is adaptability. So, we've got to use that term. Something that may be a little bit unique, perhaps to Valkyrie Enterprises, but I think there's a lot that can translate to other organizations, is that you are employee owned. And tell us a little bit about the ownership committee that's not just made up of senior leaders, but the organization. Tell us about that, and really from a cultural impact, we'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Sure. And thanks for reminding me about that. So yeah, so we're employee owned, and we became an employee owned company in 2018. So we're still in our early stages, but early on we established the Valkyrie Employee Ownership Committee. It has representatives across our different divisions and locations across the country. These are all, I would say, mid and low level employees, and I don't mean that in the pejorative sense. I just wanted to highlight that it's not management. We consciously really kind of created this charter for the ownership committee to make sure that we were truly representing the core employee group and demographic in the company. This group meets typically monthly. There is a chair. Our current chair is fabulous, and she's physically located in our Dahlgren office. So they meet and they talk about educating the rest of the company on employee ownership. They talk about getting people energized about employee ownership. So as a matter of fact, we just had every year the company is valued, and which creates the value for our stock. And so we've just gone through that process, and we have a guess the stock price contest that they created this Survey Monkey, and everybody gets to guess the stock. We haven't announced it yet, so we won't say that. The winners, and this is all from the committee to leadership to say this is what we'd like to do. Winners get to go shopping in the Valkyrie store and get a sweatshirt or shirt or a ball cap or something like that with the employee owner on there. They really have helped, I think, in this matrix of communication and connectivity during COVID. That's sort of another layer there that's not necessarily always top-down driven. It's sort of like, hey, let's get together, we want to do this. They also represent kind of our charitable giving decisions. Employees may say, hey, there's a great veterans group, and I think we could sponsor a golf thing. They discuss, is this something we want to do? Not only is it something we want to do because it parallels our mission as a company, but they're aware of the financial implications too. Are we going to give this much money out, knowing that obviously these are all kind of hits to the bottom line. Do we want to do this? Does this make sense for us? And then they'll make the recommendation to our ESOP committee, which is our CEO, our COO, our CFO, and myself, to say, hey, we'd like to give some money to this organization. And so they're great, they're active, and I think they truly represent the cross section of Valkyrie at its core.
Well, I think another takeaway and a challenge for the audience is it may say, well, that's if we're not employee owned, then perhaps there's not necessarily something that may apply, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an ownership committee. I mean, it can, whatever you want to call it, it's a cultural committee or what have you, and say, hey, how do we help? How do we get employees excited about this particular organization, help them understand, what it's like to interact within it, both from a, again, personal standpoint, but even understanding tangibly what, financially what it means for the organization. Obviously you said 2018, so we're talking about that was launched prior to COVID, and not necessarily get into the mechanics of financially, why did you start the ESOP, but really curious what decisions went into, to that launch, and what impact have you seen? Because what I'm hazarding to guess here is that move actually helped you during COVID. And so just wondering what you were seeing kind of before and after that decision to go to employee ownership, and did it help, as you went through this?
Sure. Well, employee ownership, I believe, was always a strategic goal for our CEO. He had talked for years about getting to the point where he could make the company employee owned, and really so that the employees that are doing all of the hard work will ultimately get the benefit as well. We specifically designed the employee stock ownership program as to not take any money out of employees' pockets. You can't actually buy any stock. Our plan is specifically written so that it's a kind of an algorithm for this allocation based on participants and individuals, sort of W-2 comp, if you will. And so it's another retirement for employees. And so that was always, I think, with at the risk of really oversimplifying, the goal was to kind of give back to all of the employees, and kind of the underlying is, if I know I have ownership in this, and that doing things well, meeting our customers' needs, being inventive, and moving the business along is not only obviously good for the business, but if I have ownership in that, then I'm really kind of connected on a level that maybe I wasn't before. And obviously that's the goal. And I do think that particularly in trying times such as we've had up to present day in 2020, to be able to have that connection to a business is, I think brings in a little bit more hunker down, let's try to figure this out type of approach. I'll tell you, it has been, positive on so many levels. There are employees, I mean, honestly, that, kind of like, I'm young, it'll probably be years before I can, see the benefit, because it is a retirement benefit. And those folks, may take a little bit longer to understand it. But I think in general, particularly in this COVID environment, we were fortunate to have sort of that other hook, if you will, for employees to kind of say, hey, we got to figure this out, because, I'm vested here, and I really want to see this do well. And so I think we were lucky in that regard.
I know we're getting close to the close, so if there's some folks that have questions, feel free to put them into the chat. Maybe my final one is, you found out as you were going through the pandemic, kind of what worked, and that that you were resilient and that you could adapt to it. Curious what you're doing for employees now, if anything, to say, hey, we've got to keep training for the next disruption. We've got to keep preparing for the next disruption. So, curious how you're taking this experience and moving it forward in preparation.
Sure. It's funny. We early on, I think in March of 2020, when we kind of got together in that room and we're talking about things, we had already assigned, kind of like, oh, and I'll circle back with lessons learned in a month. It was kind of that, approach. Here we are over a year later. That's still on the to-do list because we haven't come through this all. Well,
okay.
One of the things that we did decide is, we really wanted to add a little bit more teeth and depth to a business continuity plan. And we feel pretty good, and working with our IT manager as well, that if it wasn't for the pandemic, I don't think there would have been such an opportunity to truly, train in a real environment, train for the worst. I mean, we always talk about it. Frankly, if we didn't have it, we probably would have said, okay, if this happened, we'll try to work from home, probably won't be able to, I mean, that was sort of our mindset back then. But now, it's sort of, we've done it, and we've thrived, and we've brought employees on, and we've kept employees, not all of them, but we've kept them. Our business line is great. We did an acquisition, we made a headquarters move, and we sort of proved that we got to get out of our own way, I think is really key.
So if there's not a business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan, now's the time to look at it. I do want to squeeze in one more, and I know in prior conversations, Nicole, you had mentioned the implementation of ERP, and one of the comments or questions in the chat was, during this whole last year, was there a decision to implement some new technology, any innovation in that area? And was there a favorite? Was there one that really just, really clicked and supported the organization?
Yes, so we actually changed banks during the pandemic. So there was a lot of new technologies, of course, moving off of paper checks. And I think we're not 100% there, but we're definitely trying to move to, I don't know if we can ever get 100% paperless, but we're trying to get there. And I think that will continue because that's definitely a lesson learned. The implementation of the ERP was with the new acquisition, bringing them into our ERP system. So that has gone well and done pretty much 100% virtual.
Yep.
I'd say 95%.
I think we use Teams a lot too, as far as just sort of a basic tool. It's funny, our poor IT group, I think we used Teams on the surface, and over this last year, we've been like, hey, what else can we do? File share, what do we do? And then adding the cameras. And so, if there's one bit of technology on a very probably superficial level, I would say the ability to use a Zoom, like in our world, it's Teams environment, and really figure out all of the ways it can make your life easier. And so that's really been helpful to us.
Yeah, and I think a lesson learned, I think I had this as one of my notes, is we have to be careful of Teams Zoom fatigue.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah.
One of the things I think or this doesn't really apply to Teams, but just we shoot off emails a lot of times, and I'm like, when we have an issue, maybe we don't need to address it. We didn't get on the phone, pick up the phone call, have a lunch with somebody. I think once restrictions open up, we need to get back to that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank both of you for sharing that story of how you managed through the prior year. And again, what really stood out in our prior conversations was really, yes, again, adversity, but it was really the opportunities, and the transparency that you demonstrated, and not shying away from your growth plans during that, and figuring out a way to do that, I think is a testament, and hopefully there's something that can be emulated and borrowed from the folks on the call. My thanks again to Dan and Dave and the Hampton Roads Innovation Collaborative. And also throughout this series, the HR City series, we've had good sponsorship from the Hampton Roads Society for Human Resource Management. So just want to thank them for supporting the process again. So thank you all for taking everybody on the call, your Friday afternoon, but especially to Kathleen and Nicole from Valkyrie Enterprises. Thanks for sharing your story. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
Dan.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great
Thanks,
weekend.
That was the pivot bell and the new normal bell. I saved it all till the end. So
All to the end. Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.